as you can see, we go to the next hand. I have 325 big blinds, and we're still on the first level of the tournament, so that is awesome. So how do we conduct ourselves going forward? Well, my plan is to take a lot of little stabs at the pots and hopefully grow my stack slowly but surely, and wait, and maybe I'll find another situation where I have the nuts and someone wants to give me all their chips with, you know, a subpar hand. I'm not going to do a lot of gambling. I'm going to take a lot of the initiative, be aggressive, try to steamroll the table, but if I feel resistance to my aggression, then I'll be able to back off and not have committed too many chips. What I want you to do is think about that strategy, not doing too much gambling, taking a lot of little stabs with an enormous stack, and watch how Coppercliff plays with his similarly sized stack. He doesn't protect that big stack and try to make it grow slowly. He tries to do a lot more gambling. And when you have a big stack, you don't have to gamble. You don't have to make calls in marginal spots or make bluffs in marginal spots. You want to bully the table, but also do your best to maintain that huge chip lead. It's a fine line, and I think watching how I play my big stack versus watching how Coppercliff plays his big stack, you'll get a nice compare and contrast as to one way to play a big stack. I'm going to call it the right way because it happened to work in this tournament, versus the wrong way, in my opinion, to play a big stack. So as we're going forward, watch how those two stacks grow and decline, etc., etc. I'll try and point it out when I see it, but keep an eye out on your own. So we take a break after doubling up. A couple of limpers, big stack, 24J, isolates, which he's prone to do a lot. He likes to attack limpers. They don't get the message and they both call. He leads out and gets shoved on by Hickey Bear. That's a rather enormous shove. Big stack. Was bluffing obviously, so he just folds. Here we have a small couple limpers pre-flop. Everybody sees the turn. Okay, so what do we... In the last hand, when he led out, on the flop I believe, we noticed that Big Stack 24J made a small probing bet. He probably bet about 40-45% of the pot. Here in the river, he's betting full pot. He's betting 240 chips into a 240 chip pot. I consider him one of the better players. I think he plays very well post-flop. Sometimes he chases a bit too many draws, but as far as using his aggression to build up chips, I think he does a great job. So when he's leading out for the full size of the pot, I think he's correctly ascertained that Coppercliff or Core Designs has something, and he wants to get paid the maximum. He probably doesn't have to bet out full pot, because that looks fairly strong, but I think he's making a nice big value bet. He does need to get called, and he did have the turn trips, which was easily beating Coppercliff's second pair 6 kicker. So this is the first indication of what I was talking about earlier. Coppercliff makes a very marginal river call with a very marginal hand. He doesn't have to gamble here. He doesn't have to put in 240 chips, and all he's beating is a bluff. He could have folded there and saved himself 240 chips, but he decided, well, I have a pair, hopefully it's good. And when all you're doing is relying on hope to win your hands, that big stack of yours is going to deplete quickly and often. So that's a good indication of how not to play your big stack. Alright, so we have a check raise from Eradicator, and that, you know, A lot of people tend to not believe check raises. I think more often than not, a good check raise is something to believe in. So we're not going to assume that Eradicator is monkeying around with 6-7 offsuit here. We're going to assume that he's hit this flop nice and strongly, and he's trying to get some value from Donkosaurus. Donkosaurus calls the flop. Eradicator leads again for half pot. He gets a call. He leads again for half pot on the river. He gets a call. Actually, that's a lot weaker than I thought it was. I would definitely assume he had some kind of ace, maybe ace 7, ace 8, not ace jack, because he probably would have raised there. And Donkosaurus was not a believer on the flop, and he called with second pair, weak kicker, and managed to hit his 3-outer on the turn. And for some reason, when he did, and he had someone who check raised him on the flop and then lead on the turn, he decided not to go for value. He decided just to call 2 streets, and I think he could have got a lot more out of Eradicator there, but he was a little scared of the straight draws, with the straights that came in, and on the river also there was a flush, so he played it weakly. I think Donkosaurus, when you hit your suck out, you hit your 3-outer, you have to make your opponent pay when you do that. You know, if you're gonna get lucky, you don't get lucky that often, but if you're gonna get lucky, get some chips when you do. And I don't think you did a good job maximizing the value of your hand there. Alright, we've got a limp from Huggy Bear, and again, big stack 24J isolates, Coppercliff calls. We're going to dump our 10-5. Alright, these guys are button heads again. Big stack. Alright, he raised pre, he bet the flop. Now he's betting the turn. He's getting action all the way. Alright, so the flush draw got in there. 3, 4, 5, 6 makes it straight. Coppercliff could have any of those kind of hands. Huggy Bear calls, and big stack, after betting pre-flop on the flop and on the turn, decides to fold. There's the 5-6 for the straight, and Coppercliff got there with the flush. Okay, the limp call here after big stack raised, that's awful. This is a horrible hand, especially for a guy starting the hand with 36 big blinds. The cold call with the queen 8 suited pre-flop, I think is pretty terrible as well. I think both of them calling the flop when they had their draws was fine. On the turn, though, when they only had one card to come, and big stack again let out for, what was it, 600 into 12 something on the flop, I think that's when they have to fold. I don't think they have to get the right price to draw then. On the river, the decision here was fairly trivial, and the decision here, I guess once he got that far, and he finally did hit his draw, he kind of, what do you have, 400 something chips left, he kind of had to call there. But it was a bad call, but it was made, it wasn't as bad as putting himself in that position to call by calling the flop and the turn bets. The river call for him was kind of trivial by that point. It was made trivial by the mistakes he made on the flop and on the turn. But again, we'll see how Coppercliff, who did not have to call a raise pre-flop with Queen 8, decides to get in there and gamble with his big stack in very marginal spots, chase draws, marginal in another marginal spot. This time he got lucky and managed to hit his draw and win a big pot from it. But more often than not, playing this kind of call and gamble and chase style is not the way to grow your big stack. You want to be the aggressor, take control of the table, not just chase draws and hope to hit. You have a big stack, you don't have to chase, you don't have to gamble, you can kind of sit back and be patient. But he's decided to get his chips in there in a marginal spot in the hopes of winning big with them, but risking losing big with them as well. Alright, again, we have another hand we're not going to play. Alright, so FT color leads out from the small blind. Can make calls. Alright, so now that Academy has called 2 streets, He has 475 chips left, which is less than the size of the pot. FT caller, his only play is to put Academy all in, so he's gonna bet, you know, anything more than 475. He does. He bets 600, gets the call, and he hit his gut shot straight on the river, which is, I'm shocked that he played it that way. I'm shocked that he took the second bet. I don't mind the first bet, the flop bet with the gut shot, but I'm a little surprised. 7, 8. Yeah, I'm a little surprised that he double barreled on the turn with only a gut shot when Academy, who's a bit of a calling station, called him twice. Yeah, and that's a reason we played him by Academy. I don't like the limp pre. I think I would have liked him to raise pre. I think it might have been better on the flop or on the turn to, you know, because he's so short at this point, just get your chips in there and hope to get a fold from the guy leading out. In this situation, that would have worked. The ace on the board makes that a little scary, but you know, when you've got, you know, second pair and the flush draw, get your chips in there when they're so short, and hopefully get some folds. And if you don't get your folds, then hopefully you hit your draw and double up. This is a different situation than Coppercliff is facing. Coppercliff has all the chips and he's gambling, which is the wrong strategy to take. Academy has no chips and he's not gambling, which is, you know, again, the wrong strategy to take. These guys should have changed it up. Academy should be the one who's in there gambling and betting and raising, and Coppercliff should be a bit more conservative with the chips and the one playing smaller pots and hopefully not having to gamble. So we lose Academy there. Blinds are at 2040. I still have 159 big blinds. Nobody else has more than 80 except for Coppercliff, who has me covered. I like to raise. I like to mix it up here. This is the first instance of me making a smallish raise with a marginal hand. I'm not sure where I got that bet sizing from, but that's kind of unusual. I think that was a misclick or a typo, or maybe my computer crashed and the software did it on its own. I'm not responsible for that raise sizing. Normally I would make it 85, 90, something like that. 105 is a bit big. It's a trivial error, but those trivial errors, if you keep making them, catch up to you and they turn into bigger errors. So Coppercliff calls from the big blind, as I probably expected him to do. And here's what I was talking about. This is a weak lead. He's betting a third of the pot into pre-flop raiser. And this is kind of an experiment in game, is trying to see what he does, how he reacts after leading small to a raise. I don't have to have a 9 here. I could be making this play with, you know, pocket 5s or pocket 8s, or, you know, ace king, something like that. But I'm trying to set up a history, and I'm trying to see how he reacts after he's made a weak lead. I'm trying to see how he reacts to a raise. Does his weak lead mean that he's strong? Does his weak lead mean that he's weak? I'm trying to discover early on, for as cheap a price as possible, what his weak leads mean. We get a fold, so that's, you know, we can put that in our memory banks, and we can use that later on when he makes another weak lead. It's possible that I had the best hand here. It's possible that I didn't have the best hand. That's kind of irrelevant. The point of this raise was to see what the other big stack, how he would react to a play that I made. And like I said, he's already and will in the future make this kind of weak lead a lot. So I'm going to have to, as quickly as possible, figure out how to defend against it. And this was one step in trying to come up with a game plan to counteract his game plan. And also we won some chips, so that's nice too. Alright, we've got a 5x raise from Chiquita, who's new to the table. And we're going to probably see a big pot here, because Coppercliff is re-raising. Sadly, I have to fold my pocket 5s, and I think you'll see why it was sadly momentarily. Because they get all the money in. There's my 5. Jacks versus aces. Chiquita put in 77 big blinds with, you know, pocket jacks versus a player who made a huge pre-flop re-raise and had her covered. I'm not saying that it was right to, it would have been right to fold pocket jacks there, but I think you could have played that pot a bit smaller and maybe got away from it post flop. You know, this might have been, you know, with the queen out there, she may have gotten away from her pocket jacks post flop. As it stands, she put in way too many chips pre-flop with what the situation dictated was a marginal hand. You see pocket jacks in your hand, that's a pretty big pair, but when the big stack, not this big stack, this big stack is re-raising you, and you 4-bet all in, you're probably not getting a lot of folds, and when you don't get a lot of folds, you're probably not in a good situation when he does call, and that happened to be true there. So Coppercliff is adding more and more chips to what was already an enormous pile. Big stack, 24J raises the button, re-raise from Eradicator. That's kind of that's an interesting bet size. The big stack min raise and Eradicator doubled that, which is I'm not sure I like that bet sizing, especially because he's so short at this point, and he's not getting any folds. You know, he's giving his opponent, who has a lot of chips, 3 1/4 to 1 to call, which he does. He's never getting any folds there, and now he has to play the pot at a position when he only has 3 times the pot size behind. So there's not a lot of room for Eradicator to make any mistakes. He bets out half the pot. Big stack has something clearly, and he's putting them all in, and Eradicator folds. So I think that was bad bet sizing on Eradicator's part. He wasn't getting any folds pre-flop. If he was making that re-raise with something like queens or kings, the re-raise pre-flop is fine, but leading out at the ace-high flop, knowing that you're going to fold if the guy puts you all in, I think that was a mistake. I think if you know you're going to fold when the guy shoves on you, it's probably better to check fold in that spot. I'm going to dump the suited ace after an early position limp. Wouldn't be so bad given how deep we are to limp along with the suited ace, but it's, you know, like I said, I'm not looking to gamble here. I'm looking to be the aggressor, play pots in position, and not gamble up with, you know, flush draws. So 24J and Coppercliff are going to play another pot together. This time Donkosaurus comes along for the ride. Not for long. Alright, again, big stack. 24J is raising pre, betting the flop, betting the turn. And that looks like a big overshove, but it's probably correct given how much big stack 24J has behind. If he made this 1200, that's, you know, half of what 24J has, so you may as well just, when you're going to bet half of somebody's stack, why not just put them all in? And 24J dusts off a huge number of chips and doesn't even get to see the river, let alone a showdown. Okay, here is, okay, if Eradicator hadn't have called, this would have been another good spot to test out what Coppercliff's leads mean, but because Eradicator does call, and he doesn't have a lot of chips behind, I can safely fold what is basically top pair no kicker, or second pair no kicker, no draw. Alright, so Coppercliff leads again for small, which we're starting to realize means weakness. It actually does mean weakness, based on the patterns we've observed. And now Eradicator has raised. He's putting in 40% of his stack on the turn, which indicates that he has something. He has 2 pair, maybe he has the jack. you know, all those are maybes. What we do know is that he's never folding no matter what happens. You know, Coppercliff can shove here, he's calling. Coppercliff can call and then shove the river, and Eradicator's calling. So there's no fold equity left. And if Coppercliff is indeed weak, he should recognize that and probably dump his hand here. But he doesn't. He calls. Now he checks, and Eradicator, as we expected, goes all in. And Coppercliff, what is he getting? 2.9 to 1 pot odds. He has to call probably with most of his range there. That might not be part of the range where he calls. He's basically only beating a bluff, and it's very unusual for somebody to put this many chips of his stack in on the flop and then the turn and then shove the river with a bluff, especially against the big stack. He knows, he's a good enough player to know this guy's never folding. So he's not bluffing. He has something. And when he has something, and you have a top pair and a kicker that doesn't even beat the board, you should probably lay that down. And in fact, Eradicator had the nuts on the turn and redrew to a flush on the river and gets a nice little double up. Okay, so it's folded to us in the small blind. Sometimes I like to raise here, but I also like to mix in just limping, especially against FT Caller, who I think likes to defend his big blind very lightly against me. So I'm just going to play a pot, as small a pot as possible, at a position with, you know, rather marginal hand. He checks, we get a massive flop, so we're going to lead out, and he calls. Alright, so our hand gets even stronger on the turn, and here's where I deviate from my strategy a little bit. Normally, I like to bet almost exactly the same percentage of the pot on any street with any hand when I'm going to bet. Now, that means if I have a value hand, as I do right now, where I want the player to call, my opponent to call, I will bet the same as if I'm bluffing. So normally I would bet around 40 to 43% of the pot here. That's kind of my standard, and it's almost impossible for my opponents to figure out, based on my bet sizing, if I have it or if I don't. In a situation like this, I'm going to deviate because this is a rather scary connected flop. There's a flush draw, there's an ace out there, there's a straight draw if he has Jack 10. So I want to make him pay, but I also want him to call, because I think if he calls on the flop, he's also going to call on the turn. So instead of betting 100 or 110, which would be my normal standard bet size, I'm going to bet a bit more here to try and extract some value from an opponent who I think is calling. So I lead it for 140. He does call. Now we can safely assume that if he has, you know, a queen, or well, certainly any ace, and probably any queen, he's going to call. If he misses draws, well, then, you know, if I bomb here on the river, he's just going to fold no matter what I bet. So instead of betting 210, something like that, which I would normally bet, with the designs of hiding the strength of my hand, I'm going to bet a bit more, hoping that, or kind of assuming that my opponent is going to call. So I bet 261. He does call. Wow, he had he rivered two pair there. I'm actually surprised by the river just call. It's a good river just call given the hands that we had, but I'm actually surprised that he didn't go for a bit more value when he got there in the river. Turns out it wasn't a get there. Turns out he was drawing pretty much dead from the beginning. But he didn't know that, and I'm surprised that he didn't take a stab at raising me and trying to get more value from me. So just good no call on the river given the exact hands we had, but surprising that he didn't go for some value there. Alright, so Core Designs is joining the 24J versus Coppercliff party, and he's joining in a big way. That is, no matter what he has, if he has, you know, pocket twos, this is a horrible bet. If he has King 10, it's a horrible bet. anything between those two ranges, this is a horrible bet. You never want to be in a position where you're betting 10 times the pot. If he's doing this with straight draw, yeah, just lead out for 100, 110, 150 if you want, 180 if you really want. But there's no reason to make this bet. You're either getting worse hands to fold, and there's not many good hands that are going to be able to call this kind of bet. So that bet has absolutely no strategic value to it, other than to win you far less chips than you would have won if you sized your bet properly, which I guess is not really strategic value. Well, here's a big hand for us, so let's see how we play it. That's my standard open size at this level, just a bit over 2x. Sometimes I make it exactly 120, but sometimes I like to have a little fun and make it a weird number like that. It's all the same. So we get 4 callers, which is not ideal. Most people in this spot, I think, we get 3 callers. When they get 3 callers, they are scared of the queen. You can't be scared of the queen just yet. You still have to make a bet, but know that if there's any substantial action behind you, then you can comfortably get rid of your pocket kings. As much as it pains people to do so, sometimes you just have to fold those kings. So we make a little bet. There's our 40% of the pot bet we were talking about earlier, and everybody folds. I think I would have folded if any of the people behind had raised, especially if FD Caller had raised, because I think he's more likely to have it. Copper Cliff, I would have thought about it, and I think I would have snap called if 24J had. Well, he probably would have had to shove there. I think I would have snap called him because of the dynamic that we've had in the past, where he likes to raise me on flops when he doesn't think I've hit my hand. He's done that to me a lot, and I've come back at him over the top a lot and shown him bluffs. So there's a lot of history between the two of us. So I think if he had raised me, I would have had it gone with it against him, but I could have comfortably gone and folded my kings if I was raised by either of the other two players. We didn't have to make that decision, thankfully, and instead we get to rake in some chips. Now here's that situation I was talking about before. We didn't get to try it out because after Copper Cliff had let out, Eradicator had called, and we had to fold our hand. But now Eradicator's out of the way, so this would have been a good spot to test Copper Cliff out again. Like I said before, with a 10-9 suited hand when we flopped second pair, it was actually kind of irrelevant that we had second pair. What we were doing in that hand was testing out our opponent to see if his weak leads, and I would consider this betting 120 to 390 a very small, very weak lead. We were testing him out to see what those weak leads meant. We got some information in that hand, and I would like to see us use that information here and go for another raise, but we don't. So that was one instance when I think we missed an opportunity to test our opponent out again. Not saying it would have necessarily worked, and it would have worked 100% of the time. We're trying to establish patterns here, and if we could solidify that pattern of, well, our opponent likes to lead out at every single flop, and if we raise him, he's going to fold. If we could solidify that pattern, then we can really abuse him and really steamroll him and really pick up a lot of chips. But we don't try it here. We take the safe route. We fold. And here's the standard 34 big blind under the gun all in from Core Designs. Enjoy your 60 chips. That was kind of ridiculous. Not much more to say about that.